Hi, everybody. It's Marcus Collins here, and I also have Corinne Shippard. I'm in Lexington. Corinne is in Arlington, so hopefully the technology we've got here will all work together. We're about to talk about the smart strategies for buyers to succeed in today's very competitive, very challenging, and increasingly virtual environments. So, welcome. We're broadcasting on an array of different channels on YouTube, Facebook, and Twitch. So if you have any questions, I'll be watching the questions coming in. So if you have any questions what we're going to talk about this evening, please feel free to just jot them in the chat, and as soon as I see them, we'll get around to answering those questions. So let me talk a little bit about what we are going to talk about this evening. So everything's about smart strategies, therefore smart decisions. Going to talk an awful lot about what's happening in the market. So the first 20 minutes or so we'll talk about what's happening in the market. What everybody really wants to know. When are we coming out of this? When are we going to expect homes to come on the market? All those kind of things. Then we'll look at the buying process itself. We'll look at the process, how you can be smart buyers, how to set up that search, making a smart search, and then how do you craft that successful offer in this environment? And then we'll wrap it up with a kind of summary of where we are today. So let me start off. I'm going to do the first section, then I'm going to hand off to Corinne, who will do everything else. So
you always make you do all the work, Marco.
I'm going to do all the work. No, I'm going to talk for about 20 minutes, then it's all yours. All yours. So let's talk a little bit about where we are with the market today, and feel free to chime in, Corinne, if you need to. So I'm going to focus a little bit on Arlington because it's kind of a classic first-time home buyers market. But also the message that we come out with for Arlington will kind of have broader appeal, specifically when we talk about how the market's going to change over the next 1 to 2 months. So it's kind of focused on Arlington, but there are some bigger comments that will come out of this as well. So as you can see, Arlington, this is the kind of headline numbers for Arlington. As you see, it's going to be the price has gone up considerably over the last 10 years or so. The average price in Arlington now at about $820,000. The median price, I should say, about $820,000. So clearly, an important number there. 63% increase since 2005. That's ignoring the crash. Not that there really was very much of a crash, actually, but ignoring that kind of dip we saw in 2009, that's almost a 63% rise since the prior peak in 2005. So that's a substantial increase on what we've seen in price. Let's dig into a little bit of the details, and I like to do that first of all by looking at the inventory numbers. What this is the number of homes that are available to buy on the first of the month. We've been tracking this for well over a decade now. This is a decade's worth of data. And a couple of things kind of jump out of this graph. First of all, there's the dip we saw in that 2011, 2012 timeframe. What this was a consequence of is the recession was in 2006-7, dip in 2009 in prices. By 2012, the buyers had really put that behind them. They kind of forgotten to some extent what that crash was like. They were now focused on moving forward and looking at, now's the time that I should be jumping into that housing market. It happened 12 months earlier in Arlington, and in some of those closer in towns, closer to Boston, first-time homebuyer territory, really. 12 months before that dip occurred, as you come further out to Winchester, Lexington, Belmont, and those. So it kind of got a one-year jump on many towns in the area. So that was the historical perspective. And if we roll that forward to today, or at least the latter part of 2018, 19, and we'll talk clearly more about 2020 in a minute, you can see an increase in inventory in the second half of 2018 and throughout 2019. So there was clearly something going on in the market that meant more sellers were coming in. Buyers weren't being quite as aggressive as they've been in the past in terms of the offers they were putting in. Perhaps less buyers, or I think realistically the same number of buyers, but perhaps with a little bit of caution as they're looking to buy homes in the town. So that was a consequence really of the thought in end of 19, beginning of 2020, in kind of January timeframe, when most of the predictions we're going to talk about now were kind of done, was that the market was looking for a correction because of an economic correction, uncertainty perhaps, in the market coming in 2020. We have an election, we still do, coming in a few months' time. We've kind of forgotten a little bit about that. But the thought was there was going to be a correction in the market because of the uncertainty that that election was going to bring, and so on. So that was kind of what I'm thinking in early 2020, end of 2019. And the reason I want to bring this up is that we think that once we're through the next perhaps 2 months, we'll be right back to where we were at the end of 2019, very beginning of 2020. So we'll revert to almost business as usual, not quite clearly, more to talk about that in a minute, but almost business as usual. So I think it's important to know what we were predicting in January or late 2019, early 2020, because that will give an indication of what's going to happen in the second half of 2020. So that's kind of why I'm focused on this. Home sales in Arlington relatively flat. They haven't really gone up or down very much over the years. But it's interesting to look at the metric that we follow that is a good predictor of buyer confidence, really, and that's the ratio of the sale price to the list price. So if a home comes on the market for 700,000, sells for 700,000, that's a sale price to list price ratio of 100%. As you can see, as we pulled out of the gloom and doom of the last recession, so that ratio went well over 100%. In the last couple of years, 17 and early part of 2018, that number was 104%. You can see that dip in 2019. That's really the consequence of that uncertainty we saw in the market. So a dip in that sale price to list price ratio, indicative of buyer confidence not quite as strong as it was in 2017 and 2018. Having said that, house prices, this is the median prices, have increased. As you can see, single family median price up at 821, condominiums around 600,000. So steady rise, perhaps slowing a little bit in 2019 because of that kind of uncertainty that was kicking in. So that's the numbers, and let's kind of look a little bit about the kind of the rationale behind that, the big social trends that we're seeing, and why we see such high price appreciation, certainly historically in Arlington. This graph here shows the number of people who are in which age bracket. So it's in the census period from about 2015. You can see two areas which are important here, two bumps, if you will, in this distribution. The first bump here, the top bump in age bracket, is the baby boomers, those children who were born just after World War II, now getting to retirement, now getting to think around downsizing. The lower bump here is the first-time home buyers looking to buy their first home. And if you think about the characteristics that both of those groups, the characteristics of the homes, both of those groups are looking for, number one, they're relatively small, and they're not looking for large homes, affordable, close, in the terms of downsizers, close to where they currently live. In the case of first-time home buyers, close to downtown Boston. People want a lively town. Good school systems are important for both first-time home buyers and resale for the downsizer. So if you kind of tick the boxes for Arlington, it kind of ticks all of them. Close in, vibrant town, great school system, relatively affordable homes, not as affordable as, if you go further out to Burlington, Billerica and so on, but certainly relatively affordable in comparison to the towns that surround it. So Arlington finds itself in kind of a sweet spot. So all the thought was around economic uncertainty, and lo and behold, that's been replaced by the certainty of where we are today. And so the predictions in January were really that more sellers were going to come into the market, as they thought, I've been in my home long enough, I've got the appreciation. If there's going to be a downturn in prices, maybe this is the peak I should sell. Static number of buyers in the market, they were kind of staying where they were, so we're not seeing an increase in buyers able to absorb that excess inventory. And so we saw Arlington tending more towards a balanced market in 2020. There was that uncertainty. We saw it, short to medium term. Reality is it's now, and it will continue. I'll talk more about that in a moment. Mortgage rates, for what they're worth, they're relatively static. They really weren't changing. And so we predicted that price appreciation would be slow during 2020. It was not high during 19, and it would continue at that rate into 2020. So that's the predictions for January. Now let's kind of, okay, throw in the curveball, as it were, of what we've seen over the last couple of months and start thinking about what's the impact of this coronavirus on the market in general. So I'm going to look specifically at the number of listings, because I think this is the important metric that begins to tell us what's going to happen moving forward. Before I do that, though, let's kind of think to when, back to normal is going to be. We have the lockdown being lifted in, what, 10 days now? 10 days or so. My prediction, for what it's worth, is that it will be lifted then. I can't imagine it can continue. It's almost not sustainable moving forward. But also, we are seeing some of those key metrics begin to tick down. The orange curve here is the number of confirmed cases, for example, does look to be tending downwards. The one that people worry about the most, of course, is the number of deaths from it, and that does look to be taking a very pronounced downward trend moving forward. So looks to me anyway that there is no reason really to keep this lockdown in place. Everything's heading in the right direction. So I think, given the economic impact and the trending, I think it's fair to say it'll probably be lifted. Time will tell. I have no more insight than anybody else except looking at the data. So take a little look at listings in 2019 and 2020. The blue bars are the listings in 2019. The orange bars are the listings in 2020. This is the peak of the summer market, the spring market. This is the peak of the fall market. So it kind of followed the usual distribution that we expect. But orange bars now are 2020. So January slightly higher. February about the same, slightly higher than we saw in February 2019. Remember, we had a very mild winter, so more homes were coming on the market. I split March into two. Early March, when we really hadn't had the impact, the pandemic had not had the impact as it had in the second half. It really kind of kicked in at about the middle of March. So we were tracking on about the same level in the first 2 months of March, but then you see that dramatic drop in the second half of March, and that continued into April. We're a little bit away from being able to, give some real data for May. We just had one weekend, really. Some homes will come on, but our predictions is that we will see less. So if I now kind of get the projections out for where I see the number of listings, and this is the key one. January, February, March, April is real data. May, I predict, is going to be relatively low in comparison to where it should be. April and May are the peak months in Arlington, and so we've got way less listings. What that means is, as we begin to pull out of this, those homes that were going to come on in February and April and May, will come on in June and July. I suspect what will happen, just kind of looking at what's happening today, latter part of May, June, we're going to see a lot more homes come on the market. And this has implications for sellers, of course. If they wait until June, there's going to be lots of competitions. But hey, for buyers, now may not be the right time to buy. You be cautious in terms of buying in this market, because we do know that they will come on. Homes will come on the market in that June timeframe, and we see about 100 homes, extra homes coming on the market June, July, August than we saw last year. So there's going to be a big push to get homes on the market end of May, most definitely in June, July, and then to some extent in August. Now, from a buyer's perspective, we clearly need to think about, what is the economy doing? And it's interesting, if I can just scoot over to the browser to show you some key things here. This is some models that were put out about a month ago now, I would say, in terms of, are we going to go into a U-shaped recession, V-shaped, W-shaped? Is it going to be oscillating? There's all kinds of predictions. Ultimately, what it says is, in order for us to go into the recession and then come straight back out, everything has to be right. I'm not sure that's the case as we think about today. If you think about the US economy, it's predominantly service-based. We've made a lot of mistakes in terms of going into this. It's fair to say it was not predicted the way it would be. The response has been patchy at best in some cases. US economy, 5 times as much service as there is manufacturing, and service economy has been hit very badly in this environment. And so it does seem that even though a lot of people are able to work from home, I'm working from home, Corinne is working from her office as well at home, we're not going into the office. There are many companies that simply cannot work from home, and small businesses that simply will not survive. There's also the thought that this is here for the long term, and depending on how we exit from this, to some extent Massachusetts is watching everybody else. Will this coronavirus come back with a vengeance, or will it just be kind of just every now and again it'll kind of peak and trough and peak and trough? Time will tell on that one. I don't think anybody can actually tell us exactly what's going on here and that. So that's kind of where I see the market. So as I say, from a buyer's perspective, today we've got very, very tight inventory. Thinking moving forward, that inventory is going to increase, perhaps quite dramatically. And so bear that in mind as you're thinking about, when should I buy? Think about, I wanted to kind of give you an explanation of what was happening now to give you a sense of, okay, yes, I see not much inventory today. Is that going to continue? The answer to that question is no, it won't. Homes will come on the market. Some sellers will not, stay where they are, of course. But ultimately, there are very many sellers who will begin to bring their home on the market late May, early June, and kind of the trick is to be ready for that. And that's where we kind of really start to think about, how do we actually start that process? And so I want to hand over to Corinne at this point to kind of take you through what does that smart process look like? How do you determine what exactly am I actually looking for?
Excellent. All right. Thank you, Marcus. Appreciate all of your stats. You're amazing. Okay, so now let's get down into the nuts and bolts of buying. So some of these things are actually not, they're just sort of principles of buying and buying in the market that we're in here in the Arlington and environs, Cambridge, Somerville, Arlington, Lexington. And so the principles are sort of the same whether we're dealing with problems with the coronavirus or whether it's just, 3 months ago. It's sort of the same idea. So the things that are really important when you're buying a home are to consider the commute, the school systems, and the affordability. So with the commute, and this is something that a lot of buyers struggle with, there's a lot of traffic around the Boston area and also 128. There's lots of congestion. So choosing a town that is close to your job is going to make your life obviously a lot easier. And when you have two people, that starts to get complicated. If you have a couple and you're going in different areas, then you're factoring in public transportation. So these are all things that we're looking at. And people who so let's skip through that. So that's obvious. So for the schools, some people do not need school systems, and so that's not part of their consideration. For other people, their kids are school age, and they do want to be in a town where there's a strong school system. Some people really place that at the top of their list, and they're willing to take smaller homes and drive really far to place their children in a certain caliber of school. So you need to think about that if school is one of the issues that's important to you. And then affordability. So each town is more or less expensive per square foot, and there's different size yards, lots of different components about the affordability. And so what Marcus has done with the stats for our team is he's created this huge storehouse of 10 years of data that we can look at, and we can kind of tease out affordability for you. So we're going to continue on. Now Marcus is going to advance the slides. So here we go. So now to break that down, you're going to want to think about what are your needs and what are your wants. And given the kind of market that we're in, really keep your focus on what are your needs, and then secondary become your wants. So identify your needs based around the school system, the commute time, and then it comes down to, exactly what are the minimum amount of bedrooms you want. What are the minimum amount of bathrooms? Do you need a garage? Would you like a property? But really get down to the essential things. And then the rest of them, put them on your wish list and see if you can get them. And then the other issue is to make sure that anyone who is involved in the decision is in from the start. You don't want to be close to putting an offer in on a house and one person that's involved throws a wrench in it. So the other thing is Some people are fortunate and they have family members who are contributing funds. If that's the case, take that into consideration and make sure that you understand what their role is beyond sending a check. So establishing your budget. So when you're a buyer, you do need to submit a pre-approval for your mortgage. The seller will be looking at a number of offers in some situations, and they'll be looking at how strong a buyer are you. And so they want to know that the buyer that they're choosing has been approved by the bank. And this is a letter that you get from the lender, and it will say what is the highest price you are approved for to purchase the home. You do not need to spend all of the money that is on your letter, and you need to decide what you're going to afford. Really, you live in the monthly payment, and so be careful about getting your pre-approval and getting excited, and then later feeling like you're in your house and you can't afford to go out to dinner and you're not having vacations. That's called we call that being house poor, and that's a terrible situation to be in. So, do your math, crunch your numbers, and make sure that you're steady when you're putting that offer in and you're not spending too much, because you're likely going to be in your home for quite a while. Let's see. So about the pre-approval letter, that is a letter that you get for free from a lender. It does not have to be the lender who you get your mortgage from. So once you get your offer accepted, you have a period in which you can shop around and find which lender is going to give you the best terms and the right product for you. So the key is just to get that letter. The difference between a pre-approval letter and a pre-qualification is that a pre-approval letter shows that the bank has dug a little bit deeper. They've checked your credit score, they've looked at records, and so you really are approved to get a loan. There are conditions on it that are looked at later after your offer is accepted and once the home is appraised and those kind of things. But generally, it's got to be a pre-approval in this market around here. So let's see.
And then one thing on that one, because just a story that actually one of our colleagues told me today was that there was a home which was occupied. It's very difficult to show occupied homes. We'll talk a little bit about that later on. But what the agent had said, or perhaps the owner had said, in order to stop, as the agent said, to stop tire kickers, although I'm not really sure there are tire kickers around today. I mean, the risk is on the buyer and the seller side in terms of going into a home. But the agent had asked that before they make a showing for the home, not an offer, a showing for the home, they actually show that pre-approval. So this might be a reason to get the pre-approval slightly earlier than you would ordinarily have done. Now we're in the situation, ordinarily it's you can show the pre-approval when you make the offer. But what our colleague today was saying is that in order to organize a showing, you need to show that pre-approval letter. So that's something to consider, as you're thinking about financing, do it sooner rather than later, specifically in the environment we're currently in.
And they're usually good for about 3 months, and then you can get them updated. And so, sometimes you'll see a house that's a little bit above your budget, and you might have the lender change the amount that you can cover, and you might put a little bit less down, or reconfigure it a little bit. The lenders are highly responsive, generally speaking, and so it's really not a problem.
And I'm going to go one thing, and I'm not going to interrupt very much here, Corinne, but there is something else that's worth considering too. We saw a huge drop in the stock market back in mid-February. Make sure your pre-approval was after that stock market crash, because many people have assets in the stock market, and certainly from a listing agent's perspective, seeing a pre-approval which was done prior to mid-Feb gives me pause for thought to think, I wonder if you're actually worth as much, excuse the way I put that over, worth as much today as you would have been in early February. So that's kind of something to think about. So get a pre-approval soon, but perhaps get it updated if it's 3 months old. Now be a good time to get updated. Maybe you're not affected by the stock market, but perhaps your assets were, and so now would be a good time to get that pre-approval updated. So there's something to kind of write down on your list. Go get a new pre-approval.
Do it, people.
Right. Yeah. Right. Exactly.
I just wanted to go back for a second. When you're buying a home, it's generally you do want to be in the home, what, Marcus, like 5 years, 3 to 5, at least probably 5 years. I think if you buy less, the transaction cost of selling it sort of ends up being not cost effective. You're probably better off just staying in a rental position. So if you feel like you're looking for a place for 2 or 3 years, probably not worth it.
I think that's right. Wherever that break-even point is, it varies by town, but always consider the purchase a long-term investment. That's absolutely right. That's the key. If you're thinking, well, maybe I'll move in a year, we've seen situations where people have thought there'll be, great price appreciation, but in the end of the day, they're not even covering their closing costs, and selling costs. So absolutely a 3-5 year, that's when you should be considering, buying. All right.
So what is the role of the buyer's agent? Thank you. So when you're buying a house, you're smart if you get a buyer's agent, and the reason why is it's a very complicated transaction, and you don't need to go it alone. It is a service that is offered to you. It is paid for by the seller. The seller is paying a commission for the real estate agent, and you are entitled to one. And this is what the buyer's agent can do for you. The buyer's agent is bringing their knowledge of the market. They are evaluating properties for you. They are listening to your wants and your needs, and they understand that. And so they can help you go broadly from narrow down to a specific town to then start honing in on like the housing stock and the pricing, and then really evaluating individual houses that comes up. We have access to all the information from MLS. There are attachments on all the listings that we can send you. We can do evaluations of comps so that you can understand when you're putting in an offer, what is a good price for the home? What kind of offers do we expect to see on a home like this? Giving you a sense of where you want to go with that particular home. Let's see, we manage your offer. So once we put your offer in, and there's a whole negotiation process in that, once we put your offer and it's accepted, we help you through the inspection and negotiating this inspection with the seller. And then just in general, we are a great resource. We know market trends. We understand how to evaluate a property. We know contractors if you need help with that. We also have people who are involved in the transaction. We have resources to share with you, from attorneys to lenders, things like that. So, and again, you don't pay for the buyer's agent. So, the one thing you really should take advantage of is having a buyer's agent. Buyer's agent has a fiduciary responsibility to you, and a good buyer's agent will always have your back and make sure you're making a strong purchase.
Compare that with, of course,
the seller's agent. So the listing agent or the seller's agent, they work for the seller. They have a contract with the seller, and that they have a fiduciary responsibility to the seller, and they are getting the seller the best price, terms, and conditions. So just to know, and to reiterate one more time, because people really need to understand this, when you walk into a home and it is the listing agent, that person, as nice as they are actually working for the listing agent. So some people think it's smart to put an offer in through the listing agent and not work with a buyer's agent, just put it in directly. And what you have to know is that this does not save the seller or you any money. The commission that the seller pays the list agent has already been contracted. So essentially, a listing agent who's willing to put your offer in, there is basically a conflict of interest. It's really difficult, it's essentially impossible to be able to represent two parties simultaneously and try to get the best outcome for each of them. So anyway, so just want to encourage you to enlist the help of a buying agent. So this is one of the biggest investments of your life. Rely on your buyer's agent. We understand that it's very complicated. Our buyers, they ask a lot of us, and we really try to rise to the occasion, because we know that homes come up that are unique and you need to hustle and get the information out. And we know it's a very stressful process for people, and it's a process that can either go very quickly, where a house comes up and you need someone who's trusted to guide you when you don't know much, or for some people it actually takes a little bit longer, and we work to educate you in the process. And as you get more comfortable, maybe you feel a little more emboldened when you put in your offers. It's really a process, and we're here for you.
Absolutely. So that's that. What about smart buying? You know, in this market, you really do need to be one step ahead of the competitors. So, you know, what is it that constitutes smart buying? I think that's kind of the key. And what do today's buyers actually want? It's quite interesting to kind of understand that. Here we're trying to understand who your competitors are, who you are, clearly, what your needs, wants are, and what you want. But what do your competitors want? Because it's kind of important that as you kind of think about structuring that offer and looking at what homes that you want to look at.
So a lot of today's buyers, they just want the turnkey home. They don't want to do any work. And really, for those homes, those are the homes, they're kind of the hot homes because they present so beautifully. They're very competitive situations. They can be challenging, but with the right guidance, you can absolutely get those homes. And that is one thing to consider. The other type of buyer, they want to get a fixer-upper. Fixer-uppers are excellent. You can invest in them and you will get equity when you do the upgrades. Of course, today's buyers, they expect a discount if it's not upgraded. So we're going to show you those two scenarios here. So the first one is the competitive home situation, and you're going to have to take on the competition. You get comfortable with it. I mean, it's never totally comfortable, but I would say if you take it in a measured approach and you feel confident that the house is the house that you want, and you've really looked at the comps and done the research, you understand the value of the home, then it is okay to go into that situation and feel comfortable with it. One thing to say about competitive situations for these homes that are turnkey is that in the end, you come out of it and you have to do nothing to the home. And for some people, that means a lot to know what your monthly payment is going to be for the next, 10 years or 20 years. So, the second scenario, strategy number two, is
to about this, just before you scoot on, Corinne. Whenever you see a sale price to list price ratio over 100%, it's a competitive environment. There are multiple offers, and those multiple offers drive the price up. So exactly what Corinne was saying about, get comfortable with a competitive environment. If you're looking in a town, this is the data for Arlington, you see that the average is 104. A home that you walk into and go, wow, this is beautiful, almost inevitably there's going to be huge competition for that. You can almost guarantee, which kind of then leads us into, as Corinne was saying, number two.
Strategy number two is to recognize potential where others may not. And so you're looking at homes that maybe need a little cleaning up. What you need to do is have a vision. You need to look at the home and recognize the things that are powerful about the specific home. For instance, having a great location, having a flow that works really nicely with beautifully proportioned rooms, quality education. For some people, it's really great, and just having space for the price. Oftentimes, when you see a house like this, you're going to have to see past clutter and outdated decorating. And this is actually where it's fun. I love this part of it, Marcus. It's really fun to go in and see these homes. And then it's also fun to see them, 6 months later when someone has gotten one and they've transformed it and they've built, a great amount of equity. So
what can you do, right? What can you do to a home?
Yeah, and so some couples who are doing first-time home buying, they're very excited to take on something like this, specifically if they're handy. And you can really make such a great home out of a home that has great bones. So we're going to show you a few examples of things that people can do that are not, gut renovation. It's not ripping out the kitchens or the baths, but it's just sort of upgrading it. And you can make a home that looks like the home on the left, just look fresh. Painting kitchen cabinets. White cabinets are in. Painting wood cabinets is nice. In this case, on the right, just taking all of the old, stuff, appliances, interesting appliances from the 1970s, taking that stuff out.
I still don't know what they are, by the way. I have no clue what they are hanging from that cabinet up there. But anyway,
it's all radioactive. Okay, so that's the kitchen cabinets, painting them white or some color. That's kind of fun. Sometimes
Notice in
people
here
are,
though, the actual real appliances, because we have no idea what those appliances are, those real appliances are exactly the same. They've never been changed. So those are very much the same. This was just, as Corinne said, just paint. So kitchens is one thing to look at. The other one to look at, of course, is bathrooms.
right. So you can paint the wall tiles. I wouldn't recommend painting the floor tiles, but there's actually Benjamin Moore paint and some kind of bonding agent, and you can paint the wall tiles. Just in general, when you're looking at listings of new construction or homes that are just fresh looking, they're always taking the window treatments down. And so, when you go into a home and you see these window treatments that are really old, it's tough. So, but you can also paint your bathtubs white, and you can have them glazed. So bathrooms can be freshened up, and you don't have to replace everything. Just toning down some of the pink or the light blue or that green that was really great in the 30s. You can do that kind of stuff.
And next.
Removing carpet. So some homes
Mhm.
have wood floors that are covered with carpet. Certain areas tend to have that. And then other times there's carpet, but maybe you don't like it and you take it out or you replace it with fresh carpet, obviously. But some people lay down wood floors or some kind of, wood laminate or something, and gives it a different appearance. I like this house because it's got the mutton windows. I don't know, is that from what period is that,
I
Marcus?
don't know. Before my
It just
time, it's fair to say.
you paint the
Definitely before
house
my
and
time.
you appoint it nicely and you put wood floors down. It just looks fresh. Just putting things in fresh, very nice.
And then the dreaded basements.
And then dreaded basement. So, the paneling, some people actually love the paneling now and they would actually leave it like that. But if you see the picture on the left, it's really hard to conjure up what you're seeing on the right. And just painting, paneling, and any kind of wall surfaces that are darker. We have a bunch of other examples of this. We don't have them tonight because we're live. We want to move a little bit quicker. But just seeing a basement, putting down carpeting if it's dry. And then the other thing, when you look at listings that are stage, you tend to see these groupings of furniture that just conjure up a lifestyle. They're really nice. And when you see listings like the picture on the left, it's hard to really imagine that, but you see it on the right, and you can really start to imagine how it functions. And you can do that with your place too.
Yep, very easily.
So, and then landscaping. So this home on the left was a classic estate sale. The people had lived there forever. And it really just needed to be cleaned up. And, it might take a little bit of money, but a lot of times these are the kind of homes that you can get most affordably because the estate just wants to dump it. They have no money to put into it. And, depending on where it is,
Sure.
doing the landscaping can really make a place look new. In fact, people always say, I think this is sort of interesting, but the more landscaping that you take out and you put fresh, young things in, people always have this feeling like, oh, the house is new.
Right, because new construction, they only ever have, rare do they have established plants. They've usually been removed when they in the construction, but you kind of get these young saplings there, and that gives you the impression of new construction. So strategy number 2, much easier to buy. We should kind of reiterate that. It's much easier to buy the house on the left than the house on the right, just because most people, I think it's fair to say, would much prefer something that's move-in ready. Whereas looking through, with the help of Corinne and our colleagues on the team, looking through that kind of what is that in the front, picks out that kind of that needle in a haystack, which we'll talk about in a minute. But that's the key one: using your buyer's agent to kind of look at a home and go, are the bones of this right? Is there anything about this home that I can't fix? In which case maybe I shouldn't buy it. But if it really is all cosmetic and everything you've seen so far has really been cosmetic, all those before and afters, then it's a home that's worth looking at.
I would say the challenge when I'm working with buyers who are looking at fixer uppers is that it's really hard to know exactly what it's going to cost. And so if you have a budget, you have to do the math so that with this, you're coming in under your budget because it might run a little bit higher. So, I mean, you really have to love the house and feel like there's something about the neighborhood and the location and just the vibe of the house that feels like you're ready to go for it. And if you put that love and sweat equity into it, or you're smart about, working with contractors and you don't mind taking the time to figure out who the good contractor is and sit and really work with it, you can make a lot of money this way. You can make good equity and you get a great home, but you have to be ready to do it. And, there's a certain amount of stuff that you have to do before you move in. So, doing some of it you can do yourself and you might do it after you move in. But for a lot of people, when you have a couple, say with 2 people working, it's, it would take a lot of weekends to pull something like this off by yourself. So you've got a budget bringing in the professionals for a fair amount of it, some of it for sure.
Sometimes that or Home Depot becomes your friend.
And a professional paint job looks a lot better than what we ourselves, us mere mortals, do. Wouldn't you say, Marcus?
Sometimes that's true. Yes, you're right. Sometimes that's true. Yeah, it does help. But some of it you could do yourself. The basements, why not do them yourself? And then the main living areas, hire somebody to do. So it can still be done on a budget. That's for sure. You also don't need to do it on day one. You might live with that bathroom for the first 6, 9, 12 months until you've got enough equity to be able to fix the bathroom. Knowing you're thinking you don't necessarily have to do it on day one is important too. So Home Depot's your friend. Don't think it all has to be done on day one, and you can do a lot of this on a budget. So that's important to know. All right, so moving on to finding that needle in a haystack. So how do you do a search in today's market?
The one you love. Okay, best practices. So get your buyer's agent to help you out because you're going to need to do a number of things. So get your needs and your wants down and determine what your price point is. Get that pre-approval from your lender and really look at the monthly payments and understand where, kind of where your cap is, I would say. And then it's a 2-step process. So first you need to figure out what town you want to be in. And so we'll show you how you can figure that out if you haven't already narrowed it down to a few towns or a town. Then we set up a search for you with MLS using the criteria that you're giving us. And you check your email daily. Every single day, the new listings will come through. We can also put down things that have gone under agreements that when they have gone under agreement, because sometimes you're starting to really follow a house and feel like, okay, I like this one. And you don't realize that, 12 hours ago, someone went under agreement on it if there wasn't a deadline for offers. So, and then research the towns and the neighborhoods. Right now, we're not having the open houses, so you're not going out, but you can certainly drive around the neighborhoods and get a sense. You could look at the listings that are on the market. That's a good way to do it. Sometimes I create a report of homes that have sold sort of with your criteria in your town for the last 12 months. It's an exercise, but if you're a couple, sometimes you're not always on the exact same page, and it's really nice to go through and say, like, what degree of updating do you want, kind of what neighborhoods, just sort of an exercise. But then really when the listings are coming in full force, which they will be fairly soon, I hope, Marcus, then you're just looking at what's on the market.
Right.
So once you're down to those, then typically before the whole coronavirus epidemic came along, there was a typical cycle in towns that are a little more competitive. Most listings would come out on Thursdays, sometimes Wednesdays, occasionally Fridays, but typically Thursdays. And then Fridays would be the day for the broker open house. The agents get to go in, see the home, contact their clients. And then on the weekends, there would be open houses. And typically offers would be due on Monday or Tuesday. And it's a little bit different now. And when you get to the point where you want to buy, if you're putting offers in here, you'll get some insight from your buyer's agent, because that is really honestly changing every week. Sometimes they're having deadlines. Sometimes they're creating a deadline after they see how many private showings are requested. So that is a little bit in flux, I would say, but eventually we will return to that schedule. And then once you find homes that you're interested, have your agent evaluate the properties with you. And so sometimes that's just simply looking at the listing and having your agent with their experience point out things about the property that you may or may not have noticed. And then once you like the property and now seeing virtual tours, things like that, once you get to the point where you want to go in yourself, You go with your agent. You may not actually be going in at the same time. Everybody has sort of different parameters around that, but basically practicing social distancing and safety. You go in, you evaluate the property, and then once you're ready to put in an offer, and Marcus, I don't know what's on the next slide, I forget.
Well, actually, I want to say something. It's the sales distributions. Something around that, have your agent evaluate properties with you. You would think, well, I can't go into the home. That's going to be really hard. But what I found and is that using Zoom, because let's face it, everybody knows how to Zoom, but organize a Zoom meeting today. Doing that with their buyer or their client is a really powerful way, because you can sit there, you can share your screen, you can look at the 3D tour together, you can zip over to public records, go to the assessor's database, you can jump around very easily, while you're both on a Zoom call. And I found that to be very effective, maybe even more effective than it was previously, where you were trying to do things on the phone and explaining how it might work in an email. It's so much easier to just jump on a jump on a Zoom call and just do it while you're there. So I found Zoom to be a very effective tool, maybe even more effective than what we were doing previously, with all the other mechanisms. Now it's to get on a call and start looking at sharing screens and doing it that way. It's very, very effective to do that. Yeah. So next thing is around price points. Really, where should you be looking around for the sales distribution?
So these are on our website, and we'll show you how to find these on our website. We have 44 towns in our database, and this is one of the graphs for each town that we have. This is Arlington. It's called the sales distribution. Each one of those bars is called a price band, and they represent a range of $100,000. So if you look at the bottom, the final sale price, you see the $700,000 range, 700 to 800 is one of the more popular ranges. You have 72 sales approximately. This was in this is last 12 months, or last year, I guess.
2019.
Yeah, 2019. And so if you're looking at a town, what you really want to do, say your budget was 300, Arlington is a terrible town for you to look at. If you're looking at 500, you're going to be hard pressed to find a home. If you're looking in the 700s, you're going to be in much better shape. The bar 1 to 1.5 million, that actually represents $500,000 range. So that looks deceptive a little bit, but it's just because we have to scale the graphs, and so we're trying to hit most towns, and so we do it that way. And people at that price point maybe have a little more latitude. So anyway, so I'm going to show you Lexington next, just to get a change. So here, if you had 700,000 in Lexington, there are only 27 homes that sold in the last year, or in 2019. And so it's much more difficult. And even in the housing stock, when you get to the lower price points, those oftentimes represent homes that are outliers, meaning really small, or they're like a weird lot, or maybe the condition is not so great. So you really want to find the sweet spot. So when you're looking at Lexington, the sweet spot is in the 1 to 1.5 million and thereabout. And then let's just look at a town that is completely different, just for fun. So these are all single families. So if you wanted to buy a single family in Cambridge, it's really difficult to find something under $1 million. And so, of course, you can look, but you have to realize also the competition for single families in Cambridge is really intense. And all of those homes are probably really competitive. Wouldn't you say, Marcus?
Yes, I think they are. I mean, to say this is one which is like, you look at it and you go, really? That's kind of weird, isn't it? There's almost nothing in that sub 1 million. And then everything's in those higher price points. It's very strange. Normally, it's much more of a kind of bell curve in terms of the distribution. Here, it's all very much skewed towards the more expensive homes in single family in Cambridge. Totally different distribution for condominiums, of course, but kind of totally skewed to the higher price points in Cambridge, with almost nothing on the lower. So it's just not the normal bell curve that we would ordinarily expect. Do you want me to quickly show the website to see where you could get these stats?
Yeah, I think that would be great, just to give a sense of how you find this, and then also for people who are thinking about different towns and wanting to get a sense of how many chances would come up. So typically in a price range that comes up. How many are you if it says there are 30 homes that are coming on the market, you can bet you're not going to want to put offers on 30 of those homes. Probably more likely 10, 5, 10. What do you think, Marcus?
Yeah, probably. Yeah. Yeah.
So, you have to take that number and then
10%
just,
maybe.
yeah.
Right. So what I quickly want to show, and then we'll get back to the slide deck, is an awful lot of this data, all of these stats actually are on our website. So if you go to mapropertiesonline.com, here's our main page. Actually, there's Corinne. And scroll down a little bit and you'll see all these big buttons down here. Information about communities, information about buying and selling, of course. But here's the one that kind of talks around the numbers if you're into numbers. Real estate statistics. We have lots of statistics around towns. Inventory levels I showed you before. Sell price distribution. Why don't I actually give you the sell price distribution while we're here? You can select the town you're interested in. We did Arlington. Actually, why don't we do Somerville? Well, actually, you know what? Yeah, why don't we do Somerville? It's here somewhere. There's Somerville. Single families in Somerville. There we go. There's the Somerville single family distribution in the last 12 months. So lots of information there. Play around, just as Corinne was saying around, is this a town I can afford, or is this a town I should be buying in? Is kind of the two questions you should be asking. I know what my budget is. If I'm not going to find very many homes in this town at this budget, maybe I need to add more towns. This will tell you which towns you should add. Or if I'm at a much higher price point, maybe I've got 1.5 million to spend, really should I be looking at a town where the sweet spot is about 600,000, Billerica, for example? Probably not. And so it's a way to quickly sift through towns that you should be looking at. There's a lot more stats on the website too. It goes on and on. One I'll just kind of touch on is if you want an overview of what's going on in a town, this kind of gives you everything. I'll use Arlington as an example, as we've kind of focused on that this evening. Here's single families in Arlington. There's its distribution. There's its distribution. There's imagery. There's its distribution. Here's the median and average sale prices, for example. As you can see, the steady rise that we've seen in house prices. So lots of information. Feel free to go poke around, try and understand them. Which town should I be looking at? If there's anything you don't understand, feel free to reach out to us. Where we can talk stats more than we probably should actually, but there we go. But there's lots of stuff to look at there. So if you have any questions, feel free to reach out to anybody on the team, Corinne, anybody on the team, to kind of give you a sense of, so what actually does this mean? What's happening in the market? And we can kind of talk you through what the macro trends are, and you can see those macro trends kind of playing out really in the data, because we have in almost all cases well over a decade's worth of data. So that's kind of important. So getting back to our slide deck, there we go. So writing the offer when it gets serious. How do you do this?
This is when the fun really begins.
Right, yeah. This is when you almost have to get your checkbook out, but not quite.
All right. So you found the home. You love the home. You want to buy it. You now have to put in an offer. And when you are putting it in, I always say, if you're a buyer, think like a seller, because the seller will be sitting with the agent and making the decision. It is not the agent. The agent is guiding the seller, but the seller is the one who actually makes the decision. And I've seen people make decisions over, say, a personal letter and taking an offer that was even a little bit less because something about the buyers was compelling. Sometimes it's a financial thing where you have a stronger buyer. Sometimes they want to avoid an inspection. There are all these different components of it, but just, that's a thing. So when you're going through your offer, when you're writing the offer, that's something that you would be working with your buyer's agent. Buyer's agents negotiate. We have strategies. We don't love to share them publicly because they're sort of our little toolbox. So you notice that your offer has been accepted, and we haven't gone into that part, but we're using stats and we're writing it up and trying to help you get that house. So now we're at the moment where your offer has been accepted. It's a breathtaking moment, especially when there's 20 offers. But also just if you love that house, you start seeing the next chapter of your life, but you're not done yet. So this is what happens. Your offer is accepted. The seller will sign your offer once you agree, and you need to put in it's called an earnest deposit. Your offer is not fully accepted unless the document is signed and they have the check. So typically it's $1,000. In some situations, you might be putting down more, and your buyer's agent will explain those specifics. Now, if you have requested an inspection, it is your right. And if you have an inspection, you are going to have an inspection, and 5 to 10 days later, whatever date you set with your agent and your offer, you have agreed to tell the seller if you found anything. And if you did, then you will negotiate as to what's to be done. Sometimes, so a typical inspection, I think, what is it, Marcus? Usually like $1,000. You agree as the buyer to typically like cover the small stuff, $1,000 worth of loose door handles and little stuff. You're not going to get picky. Really, you want to keep your eye on the big prize and move forward. But if it's more, then you negotiate. And so sometimes when people write an offer, they might, actually, this is another deck, so let's come back to inspections later. So once you've gone through your inspection, you've negotiated, now we know what the real agreement between you and the seller is, and that needs to be codified. And that's put into the purchase and sale agreement that your lawyer and the seller's lawyer will draft. You look at it when everybody agrees, and then it's signed. At that point, 5% of the purchase price minus your initial offer is due. So that's typically about 10 days to 2 weeks after your offer is accepted. You need that 5%. So you need to get your funds available. Then the day after your purchase agreement is done, then you're ready to submit your mortgage application. So through the period of the inspection, you can actually be shopping for your mortgage, but the day after you have your P&S, you send over your P&S to your bank or to your lender and get the process going. And you really want to get them going quickly because you have 4 weeks to get your mortgage approved. So the mortgage contingency date is the date. Basically, the mortgage contingency says, I, the buyer, have done my due diligence. I've gotten a pre-approval. They told me it's fairly likely that they will give me a loan. I've done everything I can. And if for some reason I don't get the loan, I am allowed to exit the contract. That's what the mortgage contingency says. And so if something happens and you don't get your financing, you will get that 5% deposit back. If you get the financing, you cannot change your mind. It is binding. If you're denied the financing, you back out and the full deposit is returned. And then at that point, the bank has given you, you're cleared for closing, and then the lawyers do the final pieces, and your closing is 7 to 10 days later. And at that point, the balance of your purchase price is due. So sometimes that's 20% minus your deposit. Sometimes that's 10%. Sometimes people have committed to putting a lot more down. And then there are closing costs involved there, which we'll go over later.
And now the big
did I miss
one.
anything?
No, that's it. That's the process that you follow. Now I think it makes sense to go into a little bit more detail around the inspection. You know, what can
Go back
possibly
for
go
1
wrong.
second. I do want to say one thing, Marcus.
Sure.
So standard is you are entitled to an inspection. You're entitled to put in your mortgage contingency if you want. However, your seller may choose someone who has waived the inspection. Sometimes they're choosing someone who's waived their mortgage contingency. You may be someone who wants to do that. We'll go into some of those things. But just in terms of the timetable, if you waive your inspection, that means your P&S, your purchase and sale agreement, would probably be about 3 days later, 3 or 4 days later. And then if you have no financing, then typically after purchase and sale, they have to still do what? Like title search and stuff like that.
Right.
No,
So the key thing is, you know, if you decide to waive your inspection, you're going to have to find your 5% deposit way earlier, perhaps a week to 10 days earlier. So that's worth bearing in mind. The buyer's agent will explain all that to you, but you know, it's as well in a competitive environment to just remember there's 5% you have to find. Try and make sure it's not locked away somewhere. I've had a situation where a buyer wanted to make an offer on a home, but then looked at where their money physically was, said, well, I can't get it over here for about 2 weeks. That's really not going to be, you need to kind of get that all ready to go as you're starting the process. Don't leave it, well, it's 2 weeks before I can get my 5% over. That's going to put you in a very poor situation when your competitors are able to actually bring it over quite quickly. So that's something to bear in mind, specifically if you waive that inspection too. That's key.
So the fastest you're going to be closing on someone who's paying cash and who doing the inspection is 3 weeks.
Yeah, about 3 weeks. Just because, as you said before, title search, just the whole closing process and doing due diligence on that. It's very rare that somebody just is paying with cash and just kind of buys it. But it's about 3 weeks is the minimum to actually buy something nowadays.
I love this slide, Marcus. You wrote, inspection, what's wrong?
Everything. Well, maybe everything, I don't know, probably some things anyway.
So that's what this slide's about. So there's always something wrong with the house. When you have new construction, there are little things. These are human beings building these homes. They're unique. They're individual. Some are new, some are old. There's always something that comes up. So when you're doing an inspection, you have to be careful. You don't want to let it be the deal breaker. Be realistic about, any things that come up. You want to negotiate, make sure you're not getting the short end of the stick, but you also want to keep an eye on keeping the transaction together if you love the home. So you want to have a win-win. Wouldn't you say, Marcus?
Yep. And then a little bit on strategies. We don't want to give, too much away, but, we don't want our competitors to know what strategies we have, but these are pretty straightforward. These are kind of the inspection strategies that there are.
Yeah. So what happens when you, to request an inspection is very traditional. That's what people have always done. When you're actually in a buyer's market, where sellers are having a hard time selling their homes, there are too many homes on the market, you see inspections sort of always, right? It's when you start getting into competitive situations that someone might opt to waive the inspection. And the reason they're doing it, because it's really silly to waive the inspection, the reason to do it is because it helps out the seller. The seller doesn't have to worry about the deal falling apart. They don't have to worry about negotiating the price. The price that they were offered is the price they're going to get. So let me explain briefly what happens. So if you have an inspection and you find something and you decide to exit the contract, the seller now has to put their home back on the market. And for anybody looking at the home from then on, they can tell by the listing and at the market history, they can actually tell that the home was under agreement and that, 7 to 10 days later came back on the market. Every single buyer and their agent are going to think, what am I not seeing? What's wrong with this house? And so the seller is really taking a hit. If you walk that first time, more likely than not, they will not be making the same amount of money on the sale of their home if you have walked home during the period, because it's about the home. If something happens in the financing period at like the 4 to 6 week range, we tend to think it has to do something generally we tend to think it has to do something with the buyer. Yeah, but anyways, so if you request an inspection, basically the risk is really on the seller. They're concerned about their house going back on the market. They're concerned about losing that first round of buyers who change their mind after they didn't get it. They start thinking, well, I never really did like the closets in that house anyways, and they're moving on to the next home. So then the other idea, and waiving the inspection, you're basically saying I buy the house as is and I'm not negotiating anything. I'm just taking it as is. The seller obviously loves this. You're going right to purchase and sale. You're absorbing all the risk because you could buy that house and lo and behold, once you own it, you might find out that there's a problem that you didn't see. So the hybrid, or the way to eliminate risk but waive the inspection, is to have a pre-inspection. And on a home that has a deadline and are due until Monday or Tuesday, you can go in with an inspector. You're paying for an inspector, but you're going to be one of the offers that does not have an inspection. And so it puts you at great advantage when you're in a competitive situation. So that's waiving the inspection. If you do that, if it's a home that looks like it, I just generally wouldn't do it. I would generally do a pre-inspection, but that's just me. And then the other sort of hybrid thing where maybe there's some competition and maybe you don't necessarily have to have the house, but you want to just cover yourself. You might say, I'd like an inspection, but I agree to cover the first $10,000 worth of repairs that are revealed by the inspection. And if it happens to be 15,000 now, let's negotiate. And so, in that case, you're having the inspection. Sometimes things come up and you're following up with contractors who are coming in to price, what the repairs might be. Sure. Marcus?
Yeah, no, those are the three strategies. And we say this, you kind of just splitting the risk. In the first case, the seller absorbs all the risk. In the second case, you, the buyer, absorbs the risk. And I like that third case as well. But the pre-inspection becoming more and more popular. We've seen more and more of those pre-inspections, I think, coming in. So that's kind of a way to kind of hedge your bets.
Yeah, and part of this has to do with how competitive a situation you're in. You usually can feel when a home is going to be very competitive because of sort of just the energy around it. It's usually pretty obvious. And so when a lot of offers are coming in, the seller is looking at 10 offers. The ones where the inspection are waived, they go pretty much to the top. Someone has to really offer substantially more money for the seller to, take an offer with an inspection when there are ones without it. And of course, there are multiple there are all different kinds of terms, and the seller has to consider what they need. But inspection is really one of the big ones, wouldn't you say?
It is definitely the one that where you really do need to rely on your buyer's agent. I mean, there are lots of different strategies. You said it there yourself. In some cases, maybe it isn't competitive. So why would you waive the inspection? So you really need to rely on the buyer's agent, your buyer's agent in this case, to advise you correctly. Which way should I go? Which strategy is right for this home? Because 1 week, you might put an offer in where you waive the inspection. If you're not successful, the next week you might put an offer in, but on a different house where, guess what? You want to use a different strategy. So it really very much depends on relying on your buyer's agent and relying on them to kind of advise you what are the pros and cons, which approach is right given this home. That's key. So buyer's agents are key in this case to give you the right advice in terms of which strategy and how to tailor those strategies make sense. I knew we would get onto money eventually. We always do when it comes to financing. So financing, who picks up the tab? Unfortunately, we know the answer to that one, though, don't we?
So these are just some terms that you should be familiar with when you're talking to lenders. So loan to value ratio. This is a question of how much of the home purchase is being financed and how much are you paying. So the loan to value ratio. The higher the down payment, the stronger your offer. And the reason why is you're less likely to not get your mortgage when you're putting a higher percentage down. That's one term. And then just to know your mortgage, how much money they're lending you is not based on the offer price and the price that was accepted. It's actually based on the value as evaluated from the appraiser who goes in. So they're looking at comps, they're deciding how much your home should be worth. Occasionally, in a very competitive situation or a slightly competitive situation, I guess, the appraisal might come in lower. The appraisers are independent now after the 2008 subprime housing crisis. Basically, they ended up being independent and they get drawn out of a pool. So what we're seeing sometimes are appraisers that are coming from different regions and they don't always understand the market. So if for some reason the appraisal comes in low, the challenge with that is that you might have to cover the difference. Because your financing says you're putting 20% down on, say, $1 million house, but it turns out the appraiser thinks it's worth less, and so you're going to have to make up the difference on that. And it's very complicated math on that. It's like the shaving portions here and there, but basically that can sometimes be a glitch. But just know that it's based on the appraisal. And sometimes in a competitive situation, if it goes really high, the listing agent might actually ask you to write an addendum to the offer that says you will make up the difference if the appraisal comes in at certain price points. And that gets very complicated, and that's for another day, but just to be aware that that exists. And then just do not change anything in terms of your purchasing, your assets, your income. Don't do anything that might negatively impact your credit score. Once you have your offer accepted, do not breathe. Just stay put.
That's
Keep
right.
it.
Window
Keep your
shop
financial
only.
for closing, and once you're closed, then you can go crazy
That's right.
and
You
buy
can buy whatever you want
lots.
afterwards, but not before. Absolutely.
Deal with that pent up demand. Yeah.
That's right. Little bit on different types of mortgages. You know,
So they're different products. So your classic is the 30-year or 15-year fixed rate mortgage. The rates are typically higher, but if you're staying in the house for a long time, they are a great way to go, especially right now, the mortgage rates are so low. But if you want to go even lower, you can go with the adjustable rate mortgage. And the plus is the interest rate is lower. Sometimes it's quite a bit lower. And it's good if you're someone who doesn't plan on being in the home that long. So it might be a 5-year adjustable rate mortgage where it's fixed for 5 years and then it is adjusted to the interest rate. And so there's 5 year, 7-year, and 10-year. And just to throw it out there, the average homeowner stays in a home 7 to 8 years. So, know yourself. And if that's you, and if it's maybe a step up home, go for the go for the adjustable rate. And then there's interest only, which is kind of a less common one. You pay your interest only, and then at the end of the loan period, you pay the capital. And then just in general, when you pay your mortgage, they will include an escrow for your taxes and your home insurance. Yeah.
Yeah, just be cautious about that one. That can be quite a lot. That can be quite a lot of money, because you're going to be paying. Perhaps if you're used to paying your insurance on a monthly basis, you may well be asked to pay it a 1 year in advance on your home insurance, for example. So be as you're looking at the documents you get from the bank that's talking about how much your repayments will be. Just factor in that those numbers may be a little higher than perhaps you originally thought about. And that's important to get an understanding of that right up front as you're selecting a lender. And we'll talk about that in a minute. Ask them, how do they do escrow taxes? Do they escrow taxes? Are you expected to pay 3 months, perhaps even a year's worth of property taxes in advance? Those are important questions to ask, because ultimately that will bring in what your monthly payments are, what your initial closing costs are, and those kind of things. So important to ask those questions up front, so you don't get any surprises when you get to actually to closing.
So, Marcus, you want to do this one?
Yeah. So there are. I don't want to spend too long on this. There's a lot of different thoughts around selecting a lender. Important to know the difference between a bank and a broker. Bank is actually going to lend the money from their own set of products, and banks have a limited set of products that they use. The broker can go to multiple banks, so potentially you're going to get more choice in terms of the type of product, maybe even different rates as well, by going to a broker as opposed to a bank. Your choice, of course, which way you go, but a broker will be able to look broadly in terms of which are the right products for you given your circumstances. So that's kind of important to look at the difference. And if you're perhaps a small business owner, especially today, that might be a bit challenging. You're not a traditional buyer. Perhaps you want to be looking at a portfolio lender, a lender that will actually lend the funds from themselves, as opposed to selling that product out on the wider market. So depending on your circumstances, if you need a little bit more flexibility, perhaps a portfolio lender versus the conventional banks is the right way to go. And again, that's something, as you sit down with the mortgage broker, explain your situation, they may well kind of lead you in that direction too. In terms of who you go with, you can always go with the bank that you've been banking with for a long time, but there's no requirement to do that. In the same way that Corinne mentioned, that whoever you get your pre-approval from, you don't necessarily have to use them as your lender, and we would definitely recommend you shop around, not just from the lender who gave you your pre-approval. There's no requirement to get the loan from them. They would like you to, clearly, but there's no requirement to actually do that. And as with contractors, if you're thinking of buying one of those fixer-uppers, we have a set of contractors we work with a lot. We have our preparation services that we offer to our sellers. Those same contractors are ones that we can recommend for you. So if you feel like, I need to know somebody who can paint my house for me, then we have a reputable set of contractors. In the same way, we have a reputable set of lenders that we can introduce you to, that we've worked with. We found them to be very, the way the transaction goes has been very smooth. If we've used those lenders, we have no relationship with them, except we've known that transaction goes much smoother if you use one of those lenders. And we're happy to make a recommendation in terms of that. So I don't want to spend too long on selecting a lender, but lots of options. Again, this is what your buyer's agent's there for, to ask those kind of questions. We can point you in the right direction, give you some recommendations around who you should be talking to. So
Can we also let's just also take a moment to recognize how low the interest rates are now. They're historically low. So if you're buying right now, you are going to be so excited down the road. It's a great opportunity. It's a gift, really, them this low.
It is, yeah.
For the home buyer.
And in terms of closing costs, there are lots of different pieces to it. It's based on which county you live in. It's based on what your sale price is. There's lots of other pieces to go in. There are a large number of closing cost calculators. The lender you choose will also provide you these closing costs too, so they should not come as a surprise. And maybe it's a question to ask right up front. So, how big will your closing costs be? But there are lots of closing cost calculators out there that will give you an understanding of how much it costs to buy a home here in Massachusetts. So I'd recommend you kind of Google closing cost calculator Massachusetts and take a look at kind of what that number will be, because that too will kind of begin to think about looking at my closing costs, and I'm looking for a fixer upper. Do I have enough money to do that bathroom this year, or is the closing cost going to consume all of my the funds that I was going to use to do that fixer upper? So kind of with doing this as soon as you can, just so you can get more information to understand exactly where you are.
And part of the closing cost that's confusing is some of them fluctuate. So the sellers are paying taxes in advance. And if you're buying a condo fees are paid in advance. And you're buying a house that has an oil tank in it. Anything that you're consuming after closing that the seller has purchased, that is actually considered part of your closing cost. But really, it's a cost that you're paying for consumption once you start getting there, but somehow it's wrapped into these closing costs. But generally, for people who know nothing about closing costs, you can sort of ballpark 1% to 2%, probably like 1.5 ballpark. Just, it's going to fluctuate, like I said, but if it's not going to be 10%, it's not going to be 1.1%. It's about 1 to 2.
Yep.
Okay. Percent of the sale.
Right. So can I do it myself, or do I need an attorney? That's a good question. Turns out you do need an attorney. Wish we could do without attorneys, but unfortunately, Massachusetts requires you to have an attorney. So there we go. It's required. So.
Yep. So you're going to have 2 attorneys. You're going to have the buyer has 2 attorneys. So it's going to represent you, the attorney. He or she will represent you and represent the bank. And usually people roll it into the same person. So they'll be doing the P&S and also they'll be doing the closing. So we recommend real estate attorneys. When we work with people, we know it goes so smoothly. Sometimes we work with people, attorneys that our buyers bring in, and we see all kinds of attorneys. It's really helpful to get someone who is local, because some of the docs are local, the documents are local, and also you want to make sure it's a real estate attorney. And we have recommended attorneys, no surprise. Each of us has our favorite, wouldn't you say?
I think we do, yes. But the key thing here is As with the lender, we're going to recommend an attorney for one reason and one reason only. They're good and the transaction goes smoothly. That's the key, because the last thing you need, it's a complex transaction no matter what. And so having somebody, the buyer's agent, the lender, and the attorney all kind of going in the same direction, that's when it just goes very smoothly. And any hiccups that arise are resolved very quickly, and that's kind of where everybody wants to be. So you say sometimes when you have a lender you've never seen before, or an attorney you've never seen before, it kind of just slows that whole process down. It can be quite challenging sometimes. So that's why we have a list of recommended attorneys. Just for that reason alone, it just kind of makes the transaction run smoothly. So, given all of that, that was great, but is that actually different in today's market than it is in yesterday's market? So let's take a little look at buying in 2020. What's, the when and the how, if you think about it. So let's look at the when first of all. This tries to articulate how showings have changed in 2020. Early part of the year, the vast majority of buyers attended open houses. We've had open houses where we've had 100 people go through that open house over the course of a weekend. They stopped, just literally switched off. And now, kind of what replaced that? How were people viewing homes? Couple of things happened. First of all, the number of private showings dropped off too. Buyers were very reluctant to go into a home unless it really was the home that they wanted. Open houses was in many cases a little bit of a social thing. They would go out on a Sunday afternoon or a Saturday afternoon, go see some open houses, compare them. It was kind of a fun thing to do on the weekend. They've stopped going to do a private showing, especially when you didn't know what you were going into. Private showings dropped, became somewhat problematic, and so private showings dropped. What we found was the vast majority of buyers were doing everything virtually. They were looking at the photographs, the videos, the 3D tours. And it got to the point, and we have a situation at the moment where a buyer is not willing to do a private showing unless they can see a video, unless they can see a 3D tour of this home. And the home just has a few photographs, and the buyer is very reluctant to go into that home, put themselves at risk, without really knowing if it's a home that they actually want. So we've had this situation where most of the activity around showings, if you will, has been virtual showings, looking at those assets that exist or do not exist for homes. Now we're in a transition period. Mid-May, perhaps even a little bit earlier, the buyers are now becoming much more confident that they're going to keep their jobs, that they're working from home, the company will survive after this is through, no matter what the next 6 to 9 months, perhaps 12 months brings. So they have confidence, both in terms of their own financial position, but also increasing confidence that they're willing to go into homes. And that's the period we're in now. We're in that kind of transition period, May, June time frame. Probably if I was to draw this today, this was drawn a couple of weeks ago, I think I would bring that back a little bit. And now thinking about that transition period being in May. And so increasingly the buyers are now returning. I did a virtual open house last weekend. As I turned up to do the virtual open house, which is where I go around with a camera and commentate about the home. No buyers are supposed to be there. There was buyers in the driveway when I arrived, and there were a different set of buyers in the driveway when I left. So clearly the buyers feel confident to go out to look at homes, take the necessary precautions. So that kind of confidence is now returning. So we're very much in that gray area in the middle now where, are we in lockdown? Is the buyer confidence returning? And I think we're getting much closer to, and certainly in the next 2 weeks, we'll be in the situation where buyer confidence will be back. They will be much more willing to actually do private showings. And we may well see, it's hard to know when, we may well see open houses coming back, perhaps in a more controlled way. I think we'll probably see that in the June timeframe. That's kind of so that's the how. Lots of, and this is where I was saying before, working through on a Zoom call, looking at a home with your buyer's agent, great way to look around the home, look at the video, look at the photos, look at the 3D tour together, and you can kind of talk you know, what should I be looking for? Yes, that's a problem. Yes, that's a really nice layout. That can be done very, very effectively over a Zoom call when you can't actually be in the house with the buyer's agent. So that's something to think about. But I think we move into that confidence returns phase, and we'll be much more back to business as usual, perhaps sooner than we originally thought, is our expectation today. So that's
I
the
mean,
kind of
already,
say again.
yeah, already things are happening. I mean,
Right.
this last weekend, one of the homes I put an offer in on for one of the buyers I'm working with, there were 20 offers, and they had 20 private showings on Saturday, 20 private showings on Sunday. You know, 40 buyers that are looking to buy. They were not hesitating going in, and everyone's doing it fairly safely. As someone I know said, it's probably safer than going into your grocery store, because it's just you going in with your agent, and so your agent can open the door and let you in, and you're not touching anything, and you're just walking around, and you know, buyers who need to buy, they're doing it. That's
Yep, I think
basically
so.
what's happening.
And increasingly, you know, I think if I was drawing this today, I would bring that transition period back a little bit into that mid-May timeframe. I'm sure, as the buyers are they're very much out. So that's kind of the, you know, what's happening in terms of showing the when, but what about the how side of it? We're still in the situation where some towns are preventing showings of occupied homes. Winchester, for example, I believe Somerville, when you have a multi-family, apartment block, the, that's being slowed down, or prevented, excuse me. So that will change clearly over the next weeks, probably. But occupied homes are still a challenge. Excuse me, when we're talking to sellers, you know, what degree of comfort does the seller have having 20 groups through the home? The home last weekend that Corinne was talking about was vacant, but if that was an occupied home, how comfortable would the sellers be if they had 20 or 40, 20 groups on Saturday and 20 groups on Sunday? So still some things to be worked out there around occupied homes. We had the situation, I don't think we'll see it very often, where the buyer's agents were not willing to accompany showings. I opened the door and did a showing for somebody else's buyers, just because the buyer's agent wasn't willing to do it. That's kind of a one-off. I think that situation will resolve itself. As is scary situations. We had one of our colleagues went into a multifamily, I believe, expecting it to be empty or to be unoccupied, to find that there were kids in the bedrooms playing computer games. They were there, you know, as if it was an ordinary Saturday afternoon. Somewhat scary. So, you know, be prepared for that situation. Be prepared for the unexpected, if you like. Gloves and masks required. And, you know, there are a couple of options in terms of viewing homes. I mentioned before about doing everything via Zoom. Look at the seller's disclosure. We're asking all of our sellers to produce seller's disclosures just so you can get a better sense of the home. You may only be able to get into that home for 15 or 20 minutes over the course of a weekend. That's where the 3D tour comes in, because you can spend as long as you want on the 3D tour, looking around the home. It's almost like you were there. We did see the situation at the beginning where some homes were not allowing private showings. I think that's gone. I think we're now in the situation where virtual, looking at all the different aspects of the home virtually, and then a restricted set of private showings is coming in. Restricted
Marcus, can
inspection.
you
Sure.
explain?
Yep.
I don't know if everyone knows what a seller's disclosure is.
Oh, so a seller's disclosure is where the seller, it's a rather formalized document where the seller tells you about the home. Questions like, how old is the roof? When was the heating system installed? When was the heating system last serviced? Have you ever had water in the basement? So it's a disclosure about aspects of the home that buyers love to see, because it gives them a sense of I can't think of the word here. Comfort is the word. Yes, sense of, and confidence and comfort in terms of I'm buying the home, and the seller said they've never had any water in the basement. Okay, that's good. I mean, I feel confident. So it really is a question around just about all aspects of all the systems within the home. When were the windows replaced? When was the roof replaced? Heating system. water in the basement. I mean, you name it, it kind of talks about all of those different systems that you see in a home today.
And it's a legal document, and sellers do not have to do it. We're a non-disclosure state, right? You don't have to do it. So typically about half of the homes have it in a normal market, but now maybe people are starting to do them a little bit more. The seller is liable for what they say. They cannot lie in it, and they can't cherry pick what they're telling you because it's a 5-page document with millions of boxes and grids and places for them to write in about the home. So
Yeah.
that's a interesting,
Yeah, and it's a
important.
yes, yes, there's been water in the basement. No, there hasn't been water in the basement, or I don't know. So they get three choices in terms of that. That document, of course, doesn't is no substitute for an inspection. Inspections have been a little bit different today, in that some inspectors are not allowing buyers to attend the inspection. Again, I think this is kind of a transient period. It will change. It will become much more business as usual. So the report you get will have photos and videos, and then you'll have a phone conversation. And so really it's important, given that you're going to have limited time in the home, potentially limited time with that inspection, really to have confidence in that extended team. Your buyer agent, you've got to rely on that buyer agent, not the one who just opened the front door, that's for sure. How can you rely on somebody who's not even willing to give you that? So you need to have confidence in that team you've got around you in terms of that inspector, in terms of your buyer's agent, because you are going to have potentially limited access to that home. So you need to be able to kind of fall back on their expertise, and therefore you need to have confidence on their expertise. So that's important in this market. I think in some respects, a buyer's agent is always important. Corinne talked a lot about that, but they're even more important in this market, given the limited access you're going to have to in a home.
Some of these homes you have 15 minutes to go in. They're doing open houses and they might give you 15 minutes. And, if you can go with your buyer's agent can point out aspects to the home that you may not see. You can do a much quicker read on the home, decide if it's the home you want.
Yep. So when you're in the home as well as before as well. So, rely on your buyer's agents. Absolutely key. Find one that you're comfortable with, that has the necessary experience, and then rely on that buyer's agent, because they really are. We see so many homes. We look at so many 3D tours. We have awful lot of expertise, and so please do rely on the buyer's agent in this environment more than normal. In terms of financing, we talked, a little bit before about, banks being to tighten their lending a little bit. Be cautious about that. Corinne mentioned the appraisal. We do have the situation where the appraiser is sometimes just driving by the home, so they're not actually going in the home. There is the potential. We'll see how this plays out. We've not seen it yet, but we may, as more homes sell, a potential for lower appraisal. So we're just going to kind of watch and wait on that one. But because that appraisal is not as detailed as it was previously, and certainly the appraiser being able to go in the home and see all the aspects and the systems and so on, that it may well be that we have the potential for some lower appraisals moving forward. So financing, a little bit of a cloud over financing, not too much, I think, though. That's kind of not that much, but something to think about. And so kind of everything is virtual consultation with your buyer's agent. All the marketing will be done digitally. We'll electronically sign everything. Perhaps your inspection is a little more hands-off than you would expect. We have a buying dashboard. We want buyers to understand exactly where they are within the transaction. We're about to roll out one of those. We have one today. We're going to roll out as an app in the next couple of weeks, so you know exactly what's going on. Showing restrictions, so you only have a limited amount of time in there, and then at the end of the day, everything's e-recorded at the registry. Perhaps you're not even meeting the attorney to do the closing. So a lot of it is very much becoming more of a virtual home buying. Some of this will revert to business as usual, but I think some of it will actually remain this way moving forward. So that's kind of key, I think. And I guess what is our commitment to you, Corinne? You can take it home here.
So we're just here. We have your back. When you're buying a home, we really are looking out for your best interest. We listen to you. We try to help you find the home and give you all the information that you could possibly need and the insight so that you can make a good decision about which home and which location is right for you. So we arrange showings for you. We strategize on the offer process. We spend a lot of time educating you on that so you can put in your best offer. We negotiate on your behalf, and we just work with you through the inspection and coordinating all of the steps through to closing to get you the house. So
There you go.
yeah, it's
So
we really love.
over to you, Mr. and Mrs. Buyer.
Yeah, no, we love working with our buyers, and we've had a lot of great experiences. And you know, this pandemic is definitely throwing a wrench into it all. But I would say that buyers who are motivated, they are getting homes, and this is going to slowly change. I've been blown away by the creativity in the real estate sector, trying to figure out how to do workarounds so that people can get into a home that they need to be in and sell the homes that they need to. So, you know, reach out. We're here and we're happy to help and would love to hear your story and kind of know what you're trying to achieve and work with you. So, yeah.
So with that, we'll say thank you very much for listening. We went a little bit longer than we expected, but hopefully it was all useful. So with that, say any questions, please read out to Corinne, and let's see if we can't get you into that home that you want to be in. Bye.
Awesome. All right. Thank you for coming and listening, everybody. Take care.
Bye.
Bye.